Canada's shift away from the US-Europe emerges as the new partner. In 2025, Canada's trade relations with the European Union have skyrocketed by over 50% in just 6 years, while its ties with the United States have plunged to unprecedented lows. In a significant break from tradition, Canada's Prime Minister chose to visit Europe first, bypassing Washington. Is this the moment Canada steps away from America's influence, signaling a new era of economic independence? Once one of the world's most robust trade partnerships, Canada and the US are now entrenched in a fierce trade war. The confrontation began when Washington implemented aggressive tariff policies. On February 1, 2025, the US slapped a 25% tariff on most Canadian imports. By March 11, 2025, the US escalated, doubling tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, sending shockwaves through global metal markets. For Canada, it was a major blow, but Ottawa wasn't about to back down. On March 12, 2025, Canada retaliated, imposing a 25% tariff on $21 billion worth of American goods. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. Canada targeted key industries, from steel and aluminum to consumer goods and high-tech products. For the first time in modern history, Canada has demonstrated that its economic survival no longer hinges on its southern neighbor. This marks a turning point, with Europe emerging as a new strategic partner. In a stunning move, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney chose not to visit Washington for his first official overseas trip. Instead, he headed straight to France and the UK. Why? The Canada-EU trade agreement has driven a remarkable 50% growth in trade since 2017, making the EU Canada's third-largest trading partner, trailing only the US and China. Canadian exports to the EU have surged by 46.4% since 2016, providing Canada with more options than ever before. Carney emphasized that Canada is the most European nation outside of Europe, signaling a stronger commitment to its European ties. But it's not just about trade. Canada is also making strategic military moves. By joining Europe's PESCO military project, Canada is now part of a framework that allows faster troop movement across Europe. Canada is leading NATO forces in Latvia, reinforcing its role in defending Europe from external threats. Moreover, Canada is enhancing intelligence sharing with the UK, boosting cybersecurity and economic warfare defenses. This unprecedented participation in PESCO underscores Canada's new role as a vital player in European security. The US, unsurprisingly, is not happy with Canada's shift. Washington is pulling out all the stops to bring Canada back into its fold, threatening higher auto tariffs and pressuring major US corporations to scale back their business with Canada. But Canada is resolute. A February 2025 Abacus poll revealed that 68% of Canadians now view the EU more favorably than the US, and 44% believe Canada should even consider joining the EU. Something unimaginable just a decade ago. The numbers speak for themselves. Canada is ready for a new future. Canada's shift toward Europe is more than just an economic move. It's a geopolitical earthquake. The US is losing its grip on a nation it once considered an unshakable ally. The critical question now is whether Washington can reverse the tide, or if Canada has already severed its dependence on America. The next steps taken by both Washington and Ottawa will shape the future of North America, and the world will be watching closely. In a dramatic escalation, President Trump has announced sweeping new tariffs on steel and aluminum, imposing a 25% tariff on steel imports and a 10% tariff on aluminum. The European Union and Canada are both preparing strong retaliatory measures. Trump's decision to reimpose these tariffs is not just an economic move. It's a clear challenge to European trade practices, which he criticizes for being unfair to US industries. The EU, however, is pushing back with tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of US goods targeting key agricultural products like soybeans, beef, and poultry, along with cars and luxury items. The US and EU's trade relationship is at a crossroads, and it's unclear how the tension will evolve. As President Trump continues to criticize the EU over its digital tax measures and global production capacity, the stage is set for a titanic struggle in the international trade arena. The Trump administration is feeling increased pressure from politically sensitive sectors to rethink its tariff policies. It's not just the EU. Canada is also joining the fray with retaliatory tariffs totaling 29.8 billion Canadian dollars, roughly 20.7 billion US dollars. Canada is focusing its measures on steel and aluminum, products that are heavily exported to the U.S. This will deeply affect the steel, aluminum, and automobile industries in the U.S., sectors that depend on Canadian supplies. Additionally, these actions will impact U.S. consumer goods and automobile manufacturing industries, which are already struggling to compete with foreign producers. How will the U.S. respond when even its traditional partners like Canada escalate their retaliatory measures? Despite the growing trade tensions, the EU and Canada continue to strengthen their strategic ties, especially in efforts to reduce dependency on Russian energy. The EU has been seeking ways to work with Canada to bring energy exports into the European market, a strategy that benefits both sides. For Canada, it's a chance to boost exports, while the EU gains a more stable energy supply, less reliant on unstable nations. Clearly, the tensions between the US, EU, and Canada will play a pivotal role in shaping the global economic landscape. If the transatlantic relationship continues to deteriorate, it could shift not only the US economy, but also the balance of global power. Stay tuned for more updates as we dive deeper into these implications and explore what might happen next. In a move that has grabbed global attention, Canada has decided to cancel its $19 billion deal to purchase 88 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin. This decision, made in early 2023 under the Trudeau administration, follows similar actions by Portugal, which has also withdrawn from the F-35 program. Both countries are now seeking alternative defense solutions, signaling a move away from reliance on U.S. military products and aiming for greater independence in safeguarding their national security. The cancellation of the F-35 deal is tied directly to the rising trade and political tensions between Canada and the U.S., especially under the protectionist policies of Donald Trump. With tariffs and an unpredictable foreign policy, Canada no longer feels secure depending on the U.S. for defense needs. Portugal's defense minister, Nuno Melo, has echoed this sentiment, citing the instability in U.S. foreign policy under Trump as a primary reason for their withdrawal from the F-35 program. Now Portugal is exploring other options for replacing its fighter jets and strengthening its defense capabilities with more flexible, independent solutions. So, if Canada is walking away from the F-35, what fighter jets will replace them in its defense strategy? One of the leading contenders is the Saab J-39 Gripen, a Swedish-made aircraft. Saab has proposed manufacturing the Gripen in Canada, which would create local jobs and contribute to the country's defense industry. Canada is considering this option seriously, especially as the Saab Gripen was a finalist during the lengthy procurement process for the F-35S. The proposal includes technology transfer, which would help Canada develop its domestic defense industry. This could be a significant opportunity for Canada to gain more autonomy in equipping its military while maintaining strong ties with NATO allies. As Canada explores alternatives to foreign defense products, its defense industry is growing rapidly, contributing around 10 billion Canadian dollars annually to the economy and providing more than 64,000 jobs. Companies like General Dynamics Land Systems in Ontario and CAE Inc. in Montreal are key players, supplying essential military products to Canada's armed forces and government agencies. In parallel, the Canadian government is accelerating the development of domestic defense technologies, seeking to reduce its reliance on international partners. This shift in Canada's defense strategy is not only about self-reliance, but also about securing a more flexible and independent defense future, while still cooperating with key global allies. The broader trend of changing global military relations is becoming evident as countries in the European Union, including Germany, France, and Italy, ramp up defense spending. From 2021 to 2024, defense budgets increased by more than 30%, reaching approximately 326 billion euros by 2024. Europe is now focused on reducing its dependence on U.S. military systems and is pushing for autonomy, seeking to develop advanced defense technologies. The EU's Rear Europe initiative, expected to raise up to 800 billion euros for defense investments, underscores Europe's resolve to achieve strategic independence in military capabilities. Canada is also deeply engaged in military cooperation with European nations, working on alternative defense solutions and technology sharing. This collaboration is becoming an essential component of Canada's defense strategy, aiming to create a more independent and adaptable military force. Meanwhile, European nations are taking similar steps to ensure their defense autonomy, reducing reliance on external partners. Stay tuned for more exciting developments as this geopolitical shift continues. In the midst of a trade war, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, has firmly opposed U.S. tariffs. After the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, Ontario immediately retaliated, raising tariffs on electricity exports to the U.S. This move by Ontario has increased pressure on key states such as New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, forcing a response from the U.S. Mark Carney, in his new role, made it clear that Canada could no longer trust the U.S. and needed to protect itself. "We will never bow down to a bully. Canadians will always stand together," he declared. Ontario Premier Doug Ford also voiced strong opposition to the tariffs, emphasizing that Canada will no longer remain silent or be passive in the face of such measures. Ontario's 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S. could cost the U.S. economy billions, particularly affecting states like New York, which heavily rely on Canadian electricity. In contrast to Canada's bold stance, Mexico, led by President López Obrador, has taken a more diplomatic, silent approach. Rather than directly confronting Trump, Mexico has chosen to negotiate behind the scenes, working through private agreements with the U.S. This discreet strategy contrasts with Canada's more assertive public response. Mark Carney believes that remaining silent only encourages disrespect from the U.S., which is why Canada has opted to confront and retaliate openly. Despite this, data from the World Trade Organization shows that Mexico has maintained stable trade relations with the U.S., even through quiet negotiations. On the other hand, Canada's tough tactics forced U.S. trade representatives to engage in talks with Ontario's government, signaling a significant shift in how the U.S. treats Canada compared to Mexico. Canada's firm stance has demonstrated that bold actions can yield results. Canada, with leadership from Mark Carney and Doug Ford, has made it clear, if the U.S. wants respect, it must earn it. This trade war is far from over, but Canada and Mexico's contrasting approaches may give them an upper hand if they continue to apply smart and assertive strategies. Trump's bullying tactics will be harder to sustain in a globalized world where nations can unite to counter unfair policies. Stay tuned as more developments unfold, and the tension continues to escalate. The tourism industry is no longer just about vacations, it's now become a political statement. Over 90% of Canadian tourists have canceled their trips to the U.S., marking a sharp decline in cross-border tourism. According to the Old Orchard Beach Tourism Council, Canadian tourists accounted for 40% of visitors to the area, but this year, that number has dropped significantly. Local businesses, like hotels in Maine, are experiencing severe losses due to this shift. This drastic reduction in Canadian visitors is not merely a boycott, it's a clear expression of national pride and discontent with U.S. policies. For many Canadians, traveling to the U.S. symbolized a peaceful and respectful relationship, but the growing tensions between the two countries have eroded that sentiment. As a result, tourism has become a platform for Canadians to protest the Trump administration's policies. The Maine Tourism Council reports that Canadian tourists contribute about $1.2 billion annually to the local economy, and this sudden boycott is having a far-reaching economic impact. The cancellation of trips not only harms local businesses, but also places pressure on other industries like transportation, lodging, and retail. Small businesses are struggling to find replacement customers or cope with declining profits while fixed costs remain unchanged. This situation highlights that tourism is no longer just about consumption and leisure. It's now a tool for political resistance. By choosing not to travel to the U.S., Canadians are sending a message that they will not tolerate policies that harm their values and sovereignty. This shift in tourism patterns could spark similar movements from other nations, using tourism as a way to express dissatisfaction with foreign policies. This event serves as a powerful reminder that tourism can be an instrument of soft power. It's no longer just about moving between countries for fun, it's about countries using their travel choices to assert their national pride and resistance. Canada's decision to limit travel to the U.S. is not just an economic blow, it's a lesson in respect and self-determination. The absence of Canadian tourists could spark broader international movements, where countries may adopt similar strategies to make their political views known. As the tourism boycott unfolds, the world will be watching to see how international relations shift. Will other countries follow suit and use tourism as a tool to protest U.S. policies? Only time will tell, but one thing is clear. tourism is no longer just about leisure. It has become a tool of political expression, with far-reaching implications for the future of global relations. As we continue to observe the shifting dynamics of global trade and military relations, the situation between Canada, the European Union, and the United States is evolving in ways that could significantly reshape the economic landscape of North America and beyond. In this follow-up analysis, we will explore the deeper implications of these tensions, the potential outcomes, and the broader trends that may influence global geopolitics in the years to come. Canada's shift toward Europe, a turning point in global trade. Canada's strategic pivot toward Europe, exemplified by Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to France and the UK instead of Washington, represents a major shift in Canada's foreign policy. The Canada-EU trade deal has been a game-changer, boosting bilateral trade by over 50% since 2017. With Europe now becoming Canada's third-largest trading partner, only behind the US and China, this newfound alliance is reshaping how Canada approaches global trade. But the importance of this pivot goes beyond economics. Europe's commitment to achieving greater defense autonomy and technological innovation, as evidenced by their defense spending increase, directly aligns with Canada's broader goals in the global security sphere. By deepening military ties with European countries and investing in defense systems independent of the US, Canada is asserting its role as a key player in the transatlantic alliance. The EU's goal to raise 800 billion euros for defense projects shows Europe's determination to secure its own strategic interests, and Canada's involvement is further solidifying its position on the global stage. The growing tensions with the US, a sign of changing global alliances. The escalating trade war between the US and Canada, fueled by US tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, is emblematic of the growing strain in what was once a near unstoppable trade partnership. The US's decision to impose steep tariffs has led Canada to retaliate with its own punitive measures, such as the 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US from Ontario. This action highlights a crucial turning point. Canada is no longer content to silently accept unfair trade practices. By escalating the conflict, Canada is sending a powerful message to the US that its policies are no longer acceptable. The economic consequences of this trade war are significant. The United States has been forced to reconsider its stance, as Canadian exports are critical to industries in states like New York and Michigan. For the first time, Canada has demonstrated that it has options beyond its southern neighbor, and these options are becoming more robust with each passing year. The increasing reliance on Europe for trade, energy, and defense is a clear indication that Canada is looking to break free from its historical dependence on the United States. While Canada is taking bold steps to assert its autonomy, Mexico, under President López Obrador, has taken a much more cautious approach. Mexico's strategy has been one of quiet diplomacy, choosing to engage in negotiations behind the scenes rather than openly confronting the United States. This contrast between Canada and Mexico is telling. Canada is no longer content with silence. It's actively challenging policies it deems harmful to its economy and sovereignty. Meanwhile, Mexico's diplomatic strategy, though quieter, has allowed it to maintain stable relations with the United States. In addition to trade and defense, another area where tensions are becoming evident is tourism. A striking example of this shift can be seen in the massive boycott by Canadian tourists against the United States. According to reports, over 90% of Canadian tourists have canceled their trips to the United States in response to the growing political tensions. This boycott has had a significant economic impact on regions that heavily rely on Canadian tourism, such as Old Orchard Beach in Maine, where Canadians typically account for 40% of the visitors. This drastic reduction in tourism goes beyond economic losses. It's a powerful political. Canadians, traveling to the US was not just about leisure. It was about maintaining a peaceful and respectful relationship between two neighboring countries. With the rise in trade tensions and hostile rhetoric from the US, many Canadians have chosen to stop crossing the border as a form of protest. What does this mean for the future of international relations? It signals that countries, especially those with deep cultural and economic ties, are willing to use their economic power to express dissatisfaction with foreign policies. It's not just about declining to visit attractions or spend money. It's about making a statement about respect, values, and the future direction of global relations. Looking ahead, the shifting geopolitical landscape. As the US's traditional influence wanes, we are witnessing the rise of new global powers and partnerships. Canada's pivot toward Europe is just one example of this broader trend. The growing economic and defense cooperation between Canada and Europe, combined with the increasing independence of EU nations, suggests that the old model of global alliances is being redefined. However, it remains to be seen how the US will react in the long term. Will it double down on its protectionist policies, or will it attempt to mend relations with Canada and its European allies? As the world becomes more interconnected, the US may find it increasingly difficult to maintain its historical dominance. The key to the future of North America and Europe lies in how these nations respond to the evolving global order. At the same time, the trade war and the resulting shifts in global alliances are having a profound effect on other areas of international policy. Whether it's defense, tourism, or economic cooperation, the relationships between countries are increasingly defined by a desire for sovereignty, respect, and fairness. As countries around the world continue to assert their independence, the balance of power is shifting, and we are entering a new era of global diplomacy. Closing thoughts. What's next for Canada and the US? In the coming months, it will be crucial to watch how the US, Canada, and Europe navigate this complex geopolitical landscape. Will Canada continue its tough stance, or will it seek to repair relations with the US? Will Mexico's quieter approach continue to yield results, or will it face mounting pressure to take more assertive action? The answers to these questions will shape the future of North American trade, defense, and international relations as a whole. As we conclude this analysis, we want to hear from you. What do you think about the growing tensions between the US, Canada, and the EU? Do you believe Canada's hardline stance will pay off, or is there another way forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis and updates on this ongoing situation.